Okay, perfect. Well, great. Thank you all for joining us today for our first meeting of the P&A Senate for this academic year. I appreciate your time early on this Friday morning. My name is Tony Apps. I'm the director of the Graduate School's Educational Policy Office, and I'm the chair of the P&A Senate and the P&A Consultative Committee for this academic year. And with me, as always, is my chair-elect, Molly Benzik. Our agenda for today is actually just largely going to be about setting the stage for the upcoming year. So we had some things get moved around, so we don't have any outside presenters with us today. It's just going to be our Senate members kind of talking about what we're hearing locally, goals for the upcoming year, and so on. So I'll be kind of talking through some of our goals. Our subcommittee co-chairs are going to give an update. And then Molly is going to talk about the nomination process for P&A honors and awards. And then we're going to spend about half of our time, so the second half, kind of having a group discussion around issues you're hearing and items we want to bring to the full Senate this year. So we should have a fair amount of time for conversation. Reminder that you can put things in the chat if needed, but if it's anything significant, we'd love to have you just raise your hand so that you can be recognized. If folks are speaking more than once, we might recognize someone who's not spoken yet, in order to just make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard. And as always, just here for civil conversation and sometimes disagreement, and that's okay. Just wanted to Oh yeah, make sure that we're all set here. Sorry, I got a direct message and I'm trying to do the thing where you read and talk at the same time and I'm not making sense. Yes, excuse me. No worries. Okay, so we are gonna get things started. I'm going to claim ignorance and say I didn't notice until this morning that the chair's notes are supposed to go under subcommittee reports, Jacqueline. So I'm doing them slightly out of order and I'm just going to do them now during my goals for the year section. Um, the first item, just some like housekeeping things, updates for the group. The OHR Total Rewards group is going to be presenting on a number of topics around benefits and compensation. They are not able to make it to one of our P&A Senate meetings. But I just heard from Pamela, you're seeing behind the scenes, that's who chatted me, to say that we are probably going to have them then attend the Benefits and Compensation Subcommittee to give that update instead. So what we'll do is we'll send out the information on that subcommittee meeting to the full group. So if anyone wants to join for the conversation around specifically like health plans, we had some questions from constituents around vaccine coverage for this year, the Minnesota paid leave program, which is new as of January 26th, so it's not quite in effect yet. All of those things, if you want to hear from live, the benefits and compensation is going to allow folks to join for that meeting. Otherwise, we'll get a report out to everyone following that conversation as well. Um, so that's one item. We'll send a note around to remind everyone of that as well. Coming up on November 10th, the P&A Consultative Committee is going to be meeting with President Cunningham. She wasn't able to join for one of our PAC sessions, so we're sort of having a special PAC session so that she could join us. We prepared questions last spring in the hopes that President Cunningham was going to be able to join us for, I can't remember if it was our Super PAC meeting or the one before that, but unfortunately, we weren't able to have that conversation with her directly. I think we met with Maggie Flatten from her office. So we still have a number of questions that we're going to continue to revise and present to the president around things like budget cuts, workforce reinvestment, the liberal education reform, work with flexibility, and some other things. I don't know how much time we'll actually have for those questions. Depends on how much the president is coming to report out to us. But following that conversation on November 10th, I'll report back to the Senate about how that conversation went and what sort of things were discussed. Additionally, Sorry, I'm trying to keep track of the chat as well. Um, Additionally, we had our first meeting of the year with the P&A Office of Human Resources and Office of the President leads. So that is our opportunity to connect with Ken Horseman and Maggie Flatten from the President's office on it's usually about a monthly basis during the academic year to discuss any issues that we're hearing around specifically HR or anything that we want to kind of feed up through the President's office that we're hearing. So we talked about what's coming up in the upcoming year, specifically like the Minnesota paid leave program, things like that. The question I brought to that group as a like kicking off, we're going to be probably discussing this more throughout the year, was around work with flexibility. Given that Molly and I had received information from a number of units that have received return to work mandates. I believe the Office of the President is in 5 days a week. The Provost is 4 days. Budget and Finance, I want to say, is three. So things are starting to move there, and I wanted to get kind of an HR perspective on what's that looking like and how's it going. What I heard in that conversation is that the stress that work with flexibility continues to serve as guidance for the university. But I'm hearing that that's much more at the individual level and not at the unit level as much. So if units are going back, individual employees might have more flexibility, but not to say that that's sort of being blanket applied. They also stressed that it was not formal policy, which I think bears repeating because um, that to me says something, which is work with flexibility is guidance. However, there's a but at the end of that sentence to say um, that individual supervisors have, the ability to require employees to return to office based on business need. However, that business need is kind of up to them. So that is what I'm hearing in that space. So I believe strongly that this is going to be a critical issue in the coming year, especially for those employees who can no longer feasibly return to the office, who are hired fully remote and are now being told to come to campus. Um, a lot of this work, I suspect, will need to be done locally within our individual units of keeping track of what's happening and making sure that, we have an eye on equity and how this is, how we're defining business need, how this is being applied to units. Um, so keep in contact with your constituents locally, but also keep an eye out and let us know what you're hearing. And we'll continue to revisit this topic as things develop. With that, looking at some of our goals for the upcoming year, um, are, we're doing really well. I'm pleased to report out in terms of representation of P&A seats on governance committees. Um, we, in the past years, have had a number of seats to fill. I think we're only looking at three coming into this seat on university-wide committees. So, and then we obviously have our midterm elections coming up for Senate member seats as well. We're also very well represented there. We're missing a number of alternates from a couple of units, but we have very few voting senator seats that are unfilled. But I want to kind of let everyone know where those areas are so that you can kind of be thinking about if there's someone that might be a good fit that you can kind of direct towards these empty Senate seats. If you have any nominations, obviously you can reach out to me or Jacqueline. The midterm elections for our open Senate member seats are going to be coming up yet this semester. We'll work directly with the units that need to have those elections to fill those seats. But as always, we appreciate your support in getting that work done. Um, I can also send this out in a follow-up, but I did want to give a plug that the three university-wide committees we're trying to seat for are the Classroom Advisory Subcommittee, the Disability Issues Committee, and the Senate Library Committee. So we have one open P&A spot on each of those. So if you know of anyone or if you're interested, please do let us know. And we're going to continue to try to make sure that all of our seats are filled so that we have kind of our full representation across all these Senate committees. And then in the spring, I'm going to be inviting those P&A representatives that aren't on the University Senate, but represent us on other committees to join us for a meeting so we can kind of have a conversation about how we can connect better across those groups. And then finally, one of my goals for the upcoming year, I talked about this a little bit, I think, during orientation, but to just put it out there for folks as we're starting the work of the year, I want to take a look at the work that's being done by our subcommittees and see if there's anywhere where we could be collaborating more or doing things more efficiently. This can be challenging, right? Because our subcommittees do a lot of work. And necessarily, things like email communications are going to span all of those groups, not just the communication subcommittee. But I've asked each of the subcommittee co-chairs to just kind of take notes throughout the year about what they're discussing at their meetings, the work that's being done by members and how it's being done. And it's my goal to kind of review all of that and then give a report to PAC by the end of this academic year so that hopefully there might be some things we can move around to better align and make things more efficient for folks. Um, with that, do we have any questions thus far? Trying to catch up on the chat. Oh, thank you, Jeremy, for that plug. Yes, Jeremy Jenkins says that he serves on the Disability Issues Committee. So if you have questions, he's willing to answer them via email. And thank you, Molly, for putting those in the chat, the three committees we have. Well, if we don't have any questions there, what we can do then is to move into our subcommittee reports. So I'm going to welcome our co-chairs to give us an update on their initial meetings of the year, if they've already happened, and then tell us a little bit about what you're going to be working on in the upcoming months. And then if everyone, I know I'm not always the best at doing this, just give a brief introduction as well as you come on. I guess I'll just call on folks. That'll probably be easiest. But Brian and Pamela for benefits and compensation, are you guys here?
I'm here. I don't believe Pamela was able to make it today. She was waylaid by another agenda item on her calendar. So, yeah, uh, we had initially planned on kicking off in September, but the coinciding for timing of when we get the subcommittee members didn't really work out for us very well. I think we got that finalized the day we had our first meeting scheduled, so we just decided to skip it. Our first meeting then is going to be on October 8th. Paula Merrill is lined up to update us on activities relating to the workforce reinvestment resolution and the market refinement. Pamela and I did meet with Katie Kalaji and Paula, and we've got topics and presenters scheduled out through March. So I think we're in pretty good shape for the agenda this year. Additionally, we're putting together an annual survey for our subcommittee members to provide input for future topics to cover for the following year, which makes it easier to kick things off. So if you're a B&C subcommittee member, please begin soliciting input from your constituents, and we'll get that survey out pretty soon so we can start populating this and have a good plan for the next season. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. For our communications subcommittee, Angel is not able to join us today, but I believe Lydia is.
I don't really have any big updates, but I guess we will launch our first communications committee meeting next week, right following this meeting, and compile our notes to send to the constituents. We will also start working on the November newsletter. We will have 3 newsletters this year, and we hope to get your contributions to those if you have any. I don't know, are there any questions or anything that I need to be talking about, Tony? Besides that, but we are excited. We will focus on compliance and accessibility this year, I think, for our communications, to make sure that we align with the new policies. And yeah, I guess that's it. I don't have very much.
Thanks so much. For outreach, let's see, do we have Kim and Casey here?
Yep, we're both here. So we have our meeting scheduled for the year, and our first meeting is October 24th, which is also my anniversary, but you all can hold your um, well wishes. No, I get to spend it with all of you. And then we in the report we have the our goals for the year that we also mentioned at orientation. And so I won't read through those because you've all heard them a few times. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And then finally, we have professional development engagement, Joshua and Alex.
Yep, we're here. So my name's Alex Badges. I'm one of the two co-chairs of this committee. And I'll just say that we had our first meeting of the term on Tuesday, September 16th. But we'll be meeting from here on out on the third Monday of each month from 12 to 1. We had to move our meetings. So in case somebody was not able to make our first meeting, hopefully you've already got a calendar invite with the updated day and time. But if not, we're telling you here. I'll flag that one conversation we definitely had as a committee in that first meeting was that there was an interest among members of our committee to potentially work with members of the Benefits and Compensation Subcommittee to advocate for a more holistic university-wide approach to professional development grants and funding. There was a perception that that's sort of very piecemeal right now. Some programs have a lot, some have a little, some have none, and everybody seems to have a different approach to how to do it. So if that is of interest to anyone on that end or really anywhere here in the room, let us know, because I think there's some appetite amongst members of our committee to work towards that. Secondly, as some of you already know, PD&E, one of the main things we do is put on events, and we have had our first event of the term already. We had a professional development webinar with the University Library Services on Tuesday, September 30th. So stay tuned for a captioned recorded video coming soon on that one. It's being clipped in YouTube right now, so I'm trying to get it ready as we speak. I think that event went very well. It was basically, here are all the cool things you can do at the library, in case you didn't already know. So that was very exciting. Speaking of events, our goal is to have about 6 events, give or take, this term, and at least one more here in fall of 2025. And so if anyone has professional development webinar topics that they might want us to pursue, or policy pop-up topics that you might want us to pursue, please let us know, especially if you know of a potentially enthusiastic speaker. For those of you who are familiar with this process, the biggest challenge is usually finding somebody who is willing to talk on a topic and not so much necessarily trying to find a topic. In particular, there are a couple of policies that recently went through their review process here at the U that we're interested in as a committee, and we're trying to reach out to find prospective speakers on those topics right now. Those are research misconduct and conflict resolution. So if anyone thinks they know somebody who would be able to sort of own the university's policy on either of those two fronts and be willing to sort of speak about it and its intersections with the work that us P&A folks do, that would be great. We would love recommendations there. And then lastly, for anyone wondering more about how P&E does its work, Joshua and I got together over the summer to build 2 checklist documents that basically codifies all the practices that we as a committee use to plan and run our events. And the whole idea of those was to make sort of one-stop shop documents. Here is how we think about doing and putting on events. And if you would like access to those documents, just let us know. We'd be happy to share them. That might be something useful on the outreach or communication side, we figure.
Great. Thanks so much, Alex. We are fully ahead of time. If we get done early today, I will not make folks sit here while I call on you. I will give you time back, but we'll see where we end up when we're at the end of our conversation. We are going to jump right into discussion of P&A honors and awards nominations, and Molly is going to lead us in this conversation.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks to all of our co-chairs for those updates. It's always exciting to get the first ones of the year. So you've started, everything's underway. One of the things that when I nominated myself for this role, one of the things I was thinking about is how is the chair-elect role being used in valuable ways to this body and to our constituents. And one of the things that I've noticed, and this is because we're all always at or over capacity, no matter what we're doing, is that we don't always submit nominations, in particular for the Vicki R. Courtney Award for Outstanding Service to University Governance, which is a very specific award to people like you in this body who are working towards service to the university communities. So I had mentioned to Tony after my nomination and election that one of the things I'd like to do this year is to kind of lead this process, make sure that it is systematized with us, and that we do not miss the opportunity to nominate our fellow colleagues for these awards. And that's not the only award that's potentially something we could see in this body, but it's definitely the top one on my mind. So I created kind of a draft of like a charge list or a charge for this kind of what I'm going to call like a little working group, and some resources. This is also coming out of the fact that I started a committee like this in my current department. And so I already had a lot of these resources available to me. So I'm recycling some of the work that I've already done and that my staff have already done in my department to hopefully make this less arduous, because writing nominations and being nominated for awards is not a simple process. Even if there's only a letter of nomination and a Google form to fill out, there's a lot of work that goes into it, especially for the person who is nominating someone, because you have to kind of organize and you have to get in by the deadlines and you have to solicit letters of recommendation or things like that. So I wanted to try and streamline this. And like I said, kind of systematize it so that we don't miss those opportunities to bring awards to our colleagues. So what I'm asking for is if anyone is interested in helping in this little working group. So this is not a part of a subcommittee currently. This would be additional, but hopefully if it's spread out, because a lot of these awards are due in the spring, I think we have plenty of time to spread this work out a little bit. If you are interested in working with me on that, we didn't like set up a Google form for this or anything, so feel free to just email me and let me know. I'm hoping that we would just meet maybe monthly, and if we don't need those meetings, or if we'd rather do asynchronous meetings, like I'm trying to make this as simple as possible, but the first meeting would be sometime this month to kind of just set some foundation for this work and make sure that we know what deadlines look like and what each nomination packet looks like. And then we would move forward from there. So again, if you're interested in thinking about awarding, submitting awards, submitting nominations about your colleagues to University Honors and Awards, please reach out to me directly and I will put something on the calendar. Any questions about that?
Great. Thanks so much, Molly. And I realize I forgot to give Jacqueline a heads up, but Jacqueline, if we can set up like 4 breakout rooms and they can just be random, I can also try to do it, but I don't know exactly how. You can tell I don't manage meetings very often. We are in our time remaining today, we're gonna have a brief breakout room conversation. We'll call it like 10 minutes. So hopefully no one feels particularly on the spot. But having a conversation around what you're hearing from your constituents locally, and what things do you want to see on our agenda in the coming year. So this can be things that are, local, that might not be applicable to everyone, that you just kind of want to feel out if it's an appropriate fit for the Senate. It could be recurring issues like peak is still a significant issue for units going through it. We want to hear about all of that to make sure that we're making sure that that's making it to our agendas and that we're having those conversations this year. So we'll maybe do breakout rooms for like 10 minutes and then we'll come back as a group and just kind of discuss what we're hearing overall and having a group or a larger conversation.
Are you ready?
I think so.
Okay, here we go. I'm gonna open the rooms.
Welcome back, everyone. We're still sort of joining, so it'll just be another second. Okay, I think we're all back now. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for taking some time to kind of talk in smaller groups about what you're hearing from folks, what you want to see on our agenda. Does anybody want to kick us off and tell us kind of what you were hearing, what you were talking about in your groups?
I can start. I was in breakout room 3, so I will summarize the bullets that came up in there. I think a overall bullet was it seems like recently it has been hard to ask a relatively straightforward HR question and get a relatively straightforward HR answer. Specifically, there was a couple of anecdotes shared about how parental leave users are basically having to learn and implement the policies themselves rather than being able to get specific guidance on how to navigate those policies. There's been ambiguity for folks around COVID vaccine coverage and how they would be able to access those benefits if they're available. Um, there were definitely anecdotes shared that some people who were hired as being remote are being asked to return to work in person with relatively short notice and maybe not accommodations there. There's concerns that budget cuts are resulting in layoffs at the P&A level and that colleagues are being let go at a rate that seems unusual. Changes to visa statuses and any knock-on effects that might have for employment for some P&A staff was shared. And then lastly, it was reiterated a couple of times that tickets with respect to peak offices like finance and IT are sometimes very long. It's taking a long time to resolve some tickets for not necessarily obvious or good reasons. I know I personally had one take 3 weeks for no good reason recently. And I felt like I was the one who had to fix that problem. So those were the things that were shared in my group. And if I missed anything, folks from breakout room 3, please drop it in the chat.
Thank you so much, Alex. Colin, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, Alex mentioned this too, but I represent the School of Public Health, and I've heard from numerous people in the past few weeks about concerns in university messaging and uncertainty as it regards vaccines, especially but not limited to COVID-19 vaccines. People don't know whether the university is going to continue covering these through the university health plan. People want clearer and more prompt communications. This is the time of year when people start getting flu vaccines and now annual updates to COVID-19 vaccines. So every day that OHR fails to provide communication that is clear to people on those policies in the university health plan is a day that people can't act.
Thank you so much. I'm seeing in the chat there were also some conversations around vaccines and compensation. I'll say anecdotally, I'm hearing a lot of the same things. I had asked the question about vaccines to the Total Rewards group, and they said that they would cover it in that meeting with the benefits and compensation group. But I was surprised they didn't want to clear it up right away, which gives me pause. And yeah, we're hearing a lot of the same sort of HR concerns that we're getting answers, but they're not very straightforward. We had asked questions, for example, around how do we talk about like unionization being that like some of us in our job descriptions literally can't talk about it, but folks are asking us questions and they want to know how it affects things. You know, how does that we were essentially told it's up to us if we want to put something on our agenda, but that there was not guidance. I should say there was guidance, but there wasn't strong guidance. So we can choose to put things on our agenda. We can choose to have those conversations, but we have to be like careful about what's being discussed. And I'm not sure how much we can really do that centrally. So it continues to be traditionally folks that are union represented aren't governance represented is essentially what we've come back to. But we've asked the question a lot of times and haven't really gotten a really defined answer, from HR leads. Pamela, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Brian put this, or Colin, excuse me, put this in the chat, that one really clear, and I echo this. It is disappointing to hear that the clarity isn't being offered until November, when open enrollment starts. And in whatever access any of us have to total compensation staff, we really should. I mean, it's the questions. We've gotten over probably 10 emails on these questions already. And it does feel like November is way too late to start addressing the concerns that are being raised. And so Brian and I certainly have some contacts, but if, Tony, if there are other things we can do to press for earlier information, I think the entire campus would benefit. So that's all.
Thank you for that. And I'm looking, Alex made a note about I also got the vaccine email and I was thinking like, oh, well, they're advertising the clinics. That must mean that they've resolved this issue. But then someone else helpfully pointed out that when you go to the website, it still said like pending insurance coverage. So it was not a definitive answer, unfortunately. Anything else we're hearing from our groups or anything we wanted to like kind of discuss in greater detail that folks are hearing about?
Tony, I just wanted to say really quick, I was looking for that same email. I got the benefits and you email on October 1st. And it seems like there's some discrepancies in the information, but it does say, quote, vaccinations are covered as preventative care under the university medical plans in the section that talks about the annual flu and COVID-19 vaccines.
Okay, so some inconsistencies seeing there that it's covered, but other places seeing like it's not definitively saying that. So yeah, I think we need to definitely go back to that group and see what we can find out before the benefits and compensation meeting as well. Chrissy, go ahead.
Hi, this is Christy. I started to bring up in our group right before we returned from the breakout rooms that academic freedom has been a concern in my constituent group. Academic freedom and perceived lack of institutional support for that. that this is a huge concern and would at the very least like to see more conversation around that.
And I would welcome, if anyone has any comments, I could have prompted this earlier, but any of our university senators that have anything they wanted to share from the most recent university senate meeting, the first one of this year, if you want to share it now, feel free to raise your hand, put things in chat. But that question was raised. A faculty member specifically raised questions about academic freedom and the ability of their department or center to put out statements related to their subject area around world events. And I heard a very cautious response from the provost. I heard her say academic freedom is very important in your subject area directly as it applies to the research that you're doing. But I've never heard academic freedom so carefully carved out to say this is not applying to everything that you're doing here, which is the way faculty kind of talk about it. So that definitely was something I took note of, especially around departmental statements, though I'm not sure where else that's being applied currently.
Yeah, sorry, Laurel Nightingale here. I'm a university senator. And I heard similar. Actually, I feel like I heard pretty explicitly from the provost that they were unwilling to lay out a policy to allow faculty to make statements leveraging their academic career expertise to comment on the genocide in Gaza and similar topics. What was requested was, are you willing to lay out a policy so that we can make these statements in compliance with the university policies? And the answer was no. I mean, that's what I heard. It was a very clear no. So it's troubling.
Yeah, thank you, Laurel. That is a really helpful note because that was how that conversation came forward, was around departments wanting to be able to get things authorized, I think, to, like we have subject matter experts in this particular field. And we would like to be able to get a statement cleared by central leadership. How does this work? And there was not a clear response to that question, other than to say, academic freedom applies specifically to your area of research. So something to make note of, something I'm sure we'll be hearing about at future university senate meetings as well.
And
Nick,
Tony,
go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, Tony, related to that and to what Laurel specifically just brought forward. Thank you, Laurel, for your great memory of that exchange in the university senate meeting. I was unaware that I believe it's AF&T, the academic freedom and tenure, but it's part of the faculty senate at some point. So Laurel, you might be aware of this too, but I was unaware that they had somehow gotten back with the Board of Regents to review and potentially revoke the guidance that the Board of Regents approved last year that took precedent over or superseded the actual university governance process policy that was being proposed through the University Senate around this. And I see Laura just put her hand up, so maybe she can fill in the gaps that I'm filling, but it was like kind of said like as like a side note of like the Board of Regents and some faculty are talking about this again. So Lori, are you gonna clear that up for us?
No, that's not happening. What happened last year was AF&T as a committee wrote a resolution to when the Board of Regents agenda came out, docket came out, and it was that was on the agenda to talk about. The committee wrote a resolution. It started out to ask the board to remove that, but that's not actually, resolutions don't go to the board. That is outside the scope of the authority of committees on board. That's neither here nor there. They passed it in their committee and then they brought it to the university senate. It was very quick. There was no consultation, so I have no other feedback to provide you. I think there might have been some question as well about, but regardless, that passed. The board went ahead and made the decision that they made. And what's happening right now is they had already in the spring indicated in the fall they wanted an update on it. And so there's an opportunity to there's a comment period. I believe there were a few comments that were received on it, but my understanding, and I could be wrong, but my understanding is they're not having a conversation about this, and that this was just part of the regularly scheduled like plan. If that's helpful at all.
Yes, thanks, Lori.
Yes, I was not remembering the fine details of it. Didn't go through the proper governance, I don't think, channels in the spring, like the resolution they put forward, or it wasn't asking something specific. So I'd forgotten. Alex had dropped in the chat the Board of Regents policy on academic freedom. I just copy and pasted that particular section. As you'll see, it's very generally written. He makes a note that this is a Board of Regents policy, but not an not a university policy. Typically, Board of Regents policies are like the top of the umbrella, and then administrative policies would fall under that. That does kind of leave out how it's being enacted. But I think the way we've done this traditionally is just it's baked into the role of faculty. So I would be surprised if, there's not more conversation about how this is guaranteed in our policy moving forward, because we've certainly heard concerns from faculty around this in the Senate in the last several meetings of the last year and then the first one of this year. And Nick, you've been waiting very patiently. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Yeah, so from University Senate, my read on kind of the exchange is that the administration is essentially doubling down on the stance that they took last year when this came up, which is that they are supportive of individual academic freedoms, but they are not willing to create a policy to guide unit statements because their position is unit statements can be misconstrued as statements from the university as a whole, and the administration's position is the university as a whole is currently taking a largely stance of neutrality on these issues. So my interpretation of what's happened last year and at the most recent is the administration is doubling down on that. They're saying unit statements are not going to have a policy because we're firm on units should not be issuing statements lest they be misconstrued as statements from the university as a whole.
Can I add to that?
Please do.
Yeah, so the other complicating factor with that is that as we all know, transparency in policy is a huge part of the university. And currently, the administration has a policy around this, but they won't share it. There's no details. And it's also being inconsistently applied, as we saw last year, where certain statements were removed on certain topics, but other statements on matters of public concern were left up, which certainly begs the question of what are the criteria that are being used to assess whether something is allowed or not allowed. And that has been asked of President Cunningham and the administration, and they have thus far declined to share details. I would also say that I helped sponsor a sort of special session last spring, and the resolution that was passed in the University Senate was ignored by Cunningham and actually sort of created a constitutional crisis in terms of governance of the university, because she has an obligation to respond formally within certain time periods, and she declined to do so. So there is some fairly blatant disregard for, I would say, standard procedures that we tend to follow at the university with the administration on this topic specifically.
Gretchen, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Just to add to that, I think this extends beyond just academic freedom, but especially where it relates to P&A who are staff. I'm hearing a lot about freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and to Laurel's point about how things are being applied in a consistent way. It appears that certain departments, for example, are being instructed to avoid these quote unquote words of misalignment. So pretty much anything that has to do with diversity, equity, underrepresented, and I represent Awaka, so this is a research space, and a lot of our best work centers around these topics, but different departments are basically giving mandates. They refuse to put it in writing, of course. They want everything delivered, communicated verbally so that there's no paper trail, but telling people they can't use pronouns in their signatures, they can't acknowledge that as a land grant university, like our university sits on tribal land, things of that nature. So I just wanted to bring some awareness to that. It's not just a faculty, and the fact is, as far as academic freedom, faculty are more protected, but staff, you know, oppressing their speech, like the university could take the position that, well, this is a part of your job, for example, but I think it's kind of a fuzzy line. So I just wanted to note that.
Thank you for that. And I think that that is something that we're seeing a lot. Anecdotally, I work centrally, obviously, in the graduate school. We had updated guidance around our diversity of views and experiences fellowship statement, and the ways that we had to change that because it was specifically student facing, and a student could bring a lawsuit saying that, I'm not eligible for this award because it's for students of color, and then it would be, a greater issue. But we've been very clear, at least at the graduate school level, that we're not taking diversity and equity out of any of our documents. We just had the Higher Learning Commission here this week. We presented one of our 4 universal graded goals is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, we pretty unapologetically have said we're not going to comply to any of these sort of mandates in advance. We're going to do it when it's the law, and we're forced to change it. But I have seen, to that point, inconsistency in how units have been interpreting that. And I think it depends a little bit on how brave your leadership is, and where there may be personal lines fall in terms of taking a risk. Because yeah, I've seen some folks say, you know, they can fire me, that's fine, and then their unit doesn't change anything. And so it's a curious thing that I'm seeing centrally as well. So as folks are seeing things happening locally, again, report out to us. It's good to keep track of how this is changing and moving, and making sure that folks are getting consistent guidance as well. If units are going above and beyond to try to remove these, kind of buzzwords from all of their documentation, I would argue that that's not something the university would want to get into. That's going, that's almost a step too far if a department's being that cautious, because it's setting a stage for other units at the university. So something to consider. I guess I'll leave it at that. Anything else from our small groups or that is on folks' minds now, that you've been hearing, the first month of the year, or you anticipate wanting to discuss in the upcoming year? Molly, go ahead.
Yeah, and sort of in relation to you asking for university senators kind of response to the meeting last week. So first, I always encourage people to go and watch the recording of the University Senate, in particular the portions where the president, provost, and Senate chair are responding to questions. I think hearing their responses is better than reading them sometimes. When you see the notes, not that the notes are missing anything, it's just you hear tone and things differently. So if you look at the Senate documents, I'm sorry, docket, you can find the recording, you can find the minutes, those things. I'm not saying that for sure last week's is up there. I'm not trying to put Lori and her entire team on blast if it's not up there yet, but just letting you know. But in that meeting, a big portion of that meeting was the presentation of the strategic plan. And so I would also encourage you to look through that, or next Thursday, I'm looking at my calendar because I need to remind myself of when it actually is. Yes, next Thursday, the 9th at 8 a.m. And you can live stream this instead of attending at the Huntington Bank Stadium if you'd like to. But the president and others, or well, not the president, the others will be presenting the strategic plan. I very much recommend that you attend that, or at least watch recordings of that, or the University Senate presentation. There's a lot of questions that I have, having reviewed that now twice, because we also in August, the Senate leadership received some of that information. They are saying that they want feedback on it before they really roll it out, but it will impact our work. It will impact our curriculum. It will impact our budget planning. So I would definitely take a look at the strategic plan and make your voice heard and bring it to your constituents to get their feedback as well.
Thanks, Molly. Joshua, go ahead.
Yeah, and going off of kind of what Molly had said, I thought the as a university center as well, I was at the University Senate. I think the point about where reporting out versus discussion should be in meetings is something that I've also thought deeply about in the context of P&A Senate, on like when we have special folks with special knowledge coming, them using that time to talk at us or give us information that could have been delivered elsewhere, and using up time that could be used for having conversations and answering questions. I think finding that line as a P&A Senate, I think, is something that I would certainly advocate for. Certainly, I agree that spending an hour of that meeting 2 weeks ago, whatever that was, a week ago, was maybe not as effective, considering there was conversations to be had. But originally I raised my hand because I know there's been concerns locally, and I've heard from other folks, around like when budget cuts or budget reallocations are being made. By the very nature of what is happening, it does seem like it is disproportionately going to impact P&A staff and civil service staff, more so than it's going to impact faculty. And that may be what it's going to be, but having that explicitly posed to administration may be something worthwhile as well, I think is important. And I think throughout this meeting, and I also had the same idea with the University Senate meeting, is I think thinking a lot more about what is the place the P&A staff have at the university, and like what is, because some of us are educationally and experientially very similar to faculty, and have, so like finding, like saying it's a category can be a little arbitrary at times. So I think there was something else, but yeah, those are the main things I was thinking of. And I think just having more of a P&A presence and P&A representation in out loud, I guess you could say, in University Senate, I think is already something that I've started to think about as well.
Thank you, Josh. Just checking on our chat. From the University Senate meeting, from folks who haven't watched it yet, there was also, we had about an hour presentation of the strategic plan, but there were a lot of folks that wanted to comment on the strategic plan, and there was about 2 or 3 minutes worth of time for questions, which was probably not super well perceived, because then folks were kind of fighting over time and when they were going to be recognized. And so we didn't get as much comments from the University Senate group as I would have liked. I know there were folks who worked in the areas that they were talking about in the strategic plan who had their hands up, who wanted to share that knowledge, and we unfortunately don't have that. So I don't know. I'm going to be at the presentation on next Thursday of the strategic plan at the stadium, but I don't anticipate there's going to be much conversation coming out of, I mean, that's a presentation, right? So that's again going to be presented at us. Um, and we'll see how the conversation kind of unfolds from there. But certainly, even in the small amount of time we had to discuss, there was some desire to have the ability to give feedback on specific elements of the strategic plan, and it kind of felt like at that point that it was too late for that to be happening. So there could be some frustrations from folks about specifically how those strategic initiatives have been defined, and what we're kind of held up as the most important elements of the institution. So as you're hearing from folks, if you are hearing from folks who have questions around the strategic plan, again, feel free to bring that back to this group and we can continue to have those conversations. The strategic plan is really about, in my experience, outlining something so that when you're making budgetary decisions, when you're making these kind of overarching administrative decisions, you can point to elements of your strategic plan and say, this is why we're continuing forward in this way. So I think more than anything, it's a strategic map of where money is going to be spent at the institution. So something that we need to, keep an eye on and make sure that we're being appropriately represented in the categories that we feel we're represented in, and that employees aren't being sort of left behind and unfairly and disproportionately affected by things like budget cuts. So more to come certainly on that in the coming years. It's certainly not going to be just this academic year that it's an issue. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns for the good of the group? Hearing
Sorry,
any.
sorry,
Go ahead.
Tony. I feel like I have to say a little bit more about the strategic plan and how it relates to the budget too, because CEHD actually had a conversation with President Cunningham and Provost Ritter this week. And typically my experience with President Cunningham has been that she is very careful about what she says, and she does not say anything she wants necessarily to have questions about. Like she doesn't say something offhanded is really what I mean by that. And she said something in this conversation when she was finishing her little bullet points about the strategic plan that's really sticking in my brain. So they were what part of the strategic plan and the budget proposal she's making is, what are we going to do with the St. Paul campus, right? Like the future of the St. Paul campus is a big part of this strategic plan. And kind of it seemed offhanded, and so I'm wondering if somebody in the room had brought it up when she was mingling before the talkie part started. Because we do have CEHD has people on all three of the Twin Cities campuses, but in particular East Bank and St. Paul. And she mentioned that the golf course is a loved piece of our campus history, but it costs us $30 million a year and may not be a part of our strategic process or something. But she didn't technically say, so we're closing it. So I was like, well, that's interesting, because I've never really thought about it. I don't golf, so it's not something that comes to my purview. But then another question came up from one of our faculty members in that room, or staff members, I can't remember, about the part of the budget that allows for money for the capital improvements. So our buildings, our infrastructure that needs improvements, that has been very sorely neglected across all of our university system. She made that very clear. But apparently there's a list of specific buildings they're going to start with. So one person was bringing it up because their building is one of the ones that they were hoping to see the improvements in. So I would definitely encourage looking really closely at the budget stuff that she's proposing as part of the strategic plan, as part of moving forward. Because those things are just kind of sticking out to me as one, that it felt a little offhanded that she said it, which is very uncharacteristic for her. And two, I was just like, oh, interesting. We're going to close the golf course. And then what? So I was just yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about that other than just paying attention to those budget plans.
Yeah, and folks who are kind of talking in chat, they are selling the golf course on Larpenteur. I'm not sure if there's a secondary one that the golf team uses. Actually, no, I know for sure the golf team didn't use that golf course. And they said that what's the purpose of having a golf course then? Um, let's see. Joshua, go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't planning to talk again, but there's an in the chat going back and forth. I think there is such a good point that I think is so obvious to talk about in P&A Senate. Yeah, what does the word faculty mean at the University of Minnesota? I think and is any P&A staff member considered faculty? Because I think the way I use the word may be incorrect, but I am using it in the context of tenured tenure track faculty as a classification of employee, but I want to make sure that being that we're the P&A Senate, who's in our constituency and who's outside of our constituency is probably a really good point of clarification.
I totally second that because I also am not entirely clear on where the lines are drawn, or specifically for instructional P&A, when they are considered faculty and when they are considered P&A. Because I think there's some, yeah, it's not clear to me how it works.
Yeah,
In
and thank you.
the
Somebody just dropped in the chat. That's how I've heard it used as well as oh, now I've lost it. It's like term instructional contract faculty are technically P&A. But other faculty fall into the faculty proper designation. It has been very confusing for me to learn as a P&A-er as well. So I can only imagine how confusing it is for folks where this applies to your job directly. I do know anecdotally, I wasn't going to bring this up today, but as they're looking at the workforce reinvestment, they are going to specifically ask for term and contract faculty that are P&A to give feedback on that, but they're not quite ready for it yet. So they're like, don't start sending me people. But at some point, there is going to be a call for folks, because I think even HR has questions, around how they define this, and they're looking to make sure that that's clearer, at least as far as it goes into like the workforce reinvestment work that they're doing. And we knew that that was going to be an issue, I think, from the start.
Yeah, Josh, I work faculty affairs as one of my portfolio responsibilities, and I'm happy if you have any questions. I've spent a lot of time trying to find where all the little lines exist between the different teaching groups. And when we say faculty, we usually mean instructional term, clinical, teaching, research, contract, whatever word you want to use in front of faculty. Unless somebody's saying like regular faculty, then they mean true tenure track faculty. But both of those groups get lumped in as faculty, even though they are represented by different employee groups with similar benefits, if that makes sense.
Yes, I
I
think
have
that
a
makes
big chart I've made to fine tune it all if you ever want to look at it.
no, and it's totally fine because like with people, no one who's considered faculty in my department or my college are considered or P&A. So like the terminology may be localized a bit. Because we have P&A folks that are instructors, but they're not, yeah, besides the point. I think I am only using it in the context of governance, which really would just be saying P&A Senate eligible versus faculty Senate eligible, but people in the comments have pointed out that those aren't mutually exclusive either.
Yes, there are certain committees. I think SCEP is one of them still, where they have faculty seats, but there is flexibility on whether or not they're P&A faculty. And then there are P&A seats specifically, and that was a change in like how they sat that committee in the last couple of years, to make sure that there was like more faculty representation, but it didn't carve out P&A from that group. But I don't know if that's done consistently across the other committees. Folks have a lot of information on this. Thank you for dropping everything in the chat.
I think this conversation about who we are is always relevant, right? It's if somebody can drop in that 2-page document we made a year or two ago that says like who P&A are, it very clearly represents that we have a lot of P&A employees who are instructional employees, right? It goes through that. But we have a lot of P&A employees who are non-instructional in title, but may still teach as adjunct in another department or whatever. So like, I think that the point being made is very, very true. Like, no matter what, your instructional side makes you a faculty member, but your classification is where things get really dicey. And in particular, where there is concern about respectful discourse and things like that in our university system, including why a big part of what the workforce reinvestment resolution was talking about in trying to reclassify all instructional employees into some faculty bin, right? So just again, that's another thing to like refer back to is the workforce reinvestment resolution. As Tony mentioned, they will be seeking more feedback on some of the things that are still moving forward with that. But yeah, I totally understand the confusion because depending on which department you're in and maybe even each campus, it seems, because there's been some people from our various campuses talking about how it's talked about on their campus. Yeah, like faculty or faculty is used kind of interchangeably. And I was going to point out too, Tony and I were snickering, sorry to point us out for doing this, Tony, but we were snickering at the University Senate meeting because there was somebody at the podium, I don't remember who was actually presenting, and it doesn't really matter, that kept saying staff, but like lumping everyone in P&A and civil service together, right? And that's also missing the point of like the broad nature of our work and of our employees in these different groups. So it happens kind of in both directions.
Holding out to see if there are any more comments in this area. This is really helpful. Thank you. We continue to raise this point, but I think it's important that we start the conversation early and consider where this is going to apply throughout the year so we can be just more purposeful in the work that we're doing. I'll pause an extra second and then I'm going back to my agenda. We don't have any old business. I'm not sure when we've had old business to consider, but we officially don't. Do we have any new business to consider? I know that kind of falls into what we were just doing as well, but I'll ask the question. Okay, not hearing any. Before we adjourn, just wanted to say a thank you to everyone for serving for this year. This is an especially challenging time for all of us, myself included, and not only are our universities under attack nationwide, but even in Minnesota, where we feel like we're relatively protected still, we're facing these university-wide budget cuts. We're afraid they're going to apply to our jobs, to our coworkers, to our constituents. And it means that for, the nth year on record, we're going to have to do more with less and do more than 100% of our jobs. And not only this, you have a life outside of work, and you've chosen to take on additional responsibilities anyway, to serve yourself, to serve your unit and the institution. So thank you so much for doing this work. You are seen and you're really appreciated. And feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, concerns you have between now and our next meeting. But with that, we're adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great weekend.